Kia ora, I'm Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. No mai, hoki mai, everyone. Welcome back, people, to part 2 of my conversation with Che Wilson. I hope you enjoyed part 1. I loved it. So part 2 is a deeper look into how we care for the rainforest. How do we create a deeper relationship with nature, understanding that we are nature? I love the conversation in here about observation. And there were many parallels between our work in the collective intelligence teams and the learning from Che about being in the forest. It was quite a surreal experience for me at times, listening to Che in this, and so much around connections, value of the little trees. There was just an absolute gold mine of knowledge that Che shares with us in this podcast, and it's very deep and it's very rich, and I really hope you enjoy it. So Che, one of the things I'm really interested in is learning as we develop collective intelligence around this model, around understanding the interconnectedness. And you know, we have, in the last week or so, we have talked a lot within the team about this word ngahere, around this connection. You know, it is a lovely meaning, and really starting to think more about as people how we are connected to each other. Yeah. How did Māori care for the forest, Che? What were the things that are really meaningful to Māori around caring for the forest?
I suppose when I think about the broader idea around the question, I go back to the proverb from my own tribe. The river flows from the mountains to the sea. I am the river, and the river is me. As I understand that, what it means is I'm the universe, and the universe is me. Mm-hmm. I am God, and God is me. And we've got to remember that the ngahere wasn't something separate to us. The ngahere is us, which is why I go back to that phrase about the river. So the ngahere is us, and so we treat the ngahere as family, as cousins, as aunties, uncles, as grandparents. And the fact that we created a system where we can actually whakapapa or have genealogical relationships, connections with each other, emphasizes the point that they're not separate, but they are interconnected, symbiotic. And so when you think about that, the way you then care is no different to the way you would care for your child. Or in today's world, people seem to care more about bloody pets than they do about humans. So about your dog. And so when you, it's a bit like the Buddhists, you know, they'll ask the universe if they can use anything, if they can do different things. And Māori are very similar. We would go to a plant, go to a tree, and ask to use it. But we would then, if we're gathering rongoa, medicine, we would be gathering the trees on the outskirts of the forest, mainly, and usually picking from the eastern side of the tree, because that's where the sun hits first. And so it's the strongest side to replenish itself once you've taken from it. And so all
Right.
of that science that our tupuna understood about how the tree grows, the practices would connect to that. And then if you're going to take bark off a tree to use as a dye, you would take it from the eastern side again, even when you're going inside the forest. You take it from the eastern side because the leaves will still get that energy from the east first. You take the bark, and then all of the matter at the base of the tree, you'd strip the bark off just a little bit, and then you'd either spit or get water to put on the bit that you've taken off, and then get the matter from the ground, which is of the tree anyway, and you put that on like a Band-Aid. And that then helps heal the tree and for the bark to graft itself again,
Mm-hmm.
and to cover that bit that you've taken off. And so all of those practices at a physical level are what you do, and then at a vibrational level or a spiritual level, you're asking the tree if you can use it. And so you do that first, actually. And you're asking... Oh, yeah?
Jay, how do you ask a tree? How do you do that?
So the way I was taught to talk to the universe is to talk with intention and send it out to the universe while you're talking to a tree, a river, or a mountain. And you're not going to go, hello, I am pleased you have asked me. But the way that the tree responds back to you is through your observation of the tree and what's around it. And so there will be different things. Like I was out in my garden this morning, and already I'm seeing, just from almost a week of my kumara being in the ground, already I'm seeing a change. And then my tomatoes, I saw the mana in 2 of my plants come through yesterday, and the mana is the first flower that comes through, because traditionally you plant potatoes in a row. You plant kumara in individual mounds. You can do them in a row as well if you're doing it in big scale. And then other introduced plants, the way our tupuna planted them is you do them in taurima. So you do them in 5s, like on a dice.
Mm-hmm.
You're creating a microclimate. Mm-hmm. And the word for that, the English word for that, is kunkaks. And so within the tokorima, or the taurima, within the taurima or the kunkaks, the first one to flower, similarly when you've got a row, the first plant to flower, that holds the mana of that group. And so yesterday I saw the mana of rehua for my 2 sets of tomatoes, and then my other tomato today, my other set of tomatoes today, I saw the mana come through, which is the flower. And you mark that, because that's where you're going to get your best seed from to save. And
which comes back to the observation thing, Che, isn't it?
Yeah, so you observe, and in the observation, you that's how it talks back to you. And so there are going to be days through the lunar moon where you're going to get more worms than you're not. There are going to be days when there's more cobwebs than not. And that's based on observation. And what happened with the ethnographers and anthropologists is, because they wanted us to be like them, they thought, oh, no, it's just mumbo jumbo. But we recorded it in the names of each lunar phase, because each lunar phase has a meaning behind it. And we're entering right now into the most abundant phase. which is Tangaroa, which is as we enter into the quarter, and this last quarter. And so each phase had a name, each tree had a name, and it had parents to it and its genealogy. And those parents tell you about the characteristics of the tree and what else to observe and look out for. So it was an interconnected web of knowledge. And through that interconnected understanding of that knowledge, the tree talks back to you, the river talks back to you, the mountain talks to you. If you have the codes, if you have the knowledge. It's a bit like that that chemical chart I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
They just letters and the odd number if you don't have the code. It's a load of jumbo if you don't have the code. And no different to all of these names and the codes behind those names. And that's how you care for the forest. That's how you care for your cousins.
With those clusters of 5, Che, how do you know how to design those clusters?
So kumara, we bought kumara from the islands, and we know that they came from South America, and we know that because the South American native chicken is actually the Polynesian chicken, and everything came via Rapa Nui, via Easter Island, and you can see in their structures that they have tuahu, but then they have more than a tuahu. And so you see the combination of Moana culture and Kumara culture. Moana being Pacific, Kumara being South American. And so what we learnt is that Kumara like warm. And so we put them in mounds above the ground because that keeps them warmer. And in some areas like where I'm from, we even grew kumara where you get snow. Yeah. And what we would do is we would use scoria and hangi rocks so that the hangi rocks and the scoria would be around each mound gathering the heat. And then because we also get frost right up until now, you just put bracken over it and the frost hits the bracken rather than settling on the dirt and on the plant. And it just all of those things are science based on nature talking to us, observation, and us recording things. And so sometimes our karakia are actually telling you what to do. And the karakia, yes, is about communicating with universal vibration. But the words that have been selected are also telling you the recipe to grow good food. And so kumara were in mounds. When the early explorers, European explorers, arrived here, and they shared with us taiwa, or riwai, which are now referred to as Māori potatoes, but they got them from South America. We had an understanding of it, but then we realised they're not as temperamental as kumara, so you can bury them in the ground and you just then mound. And so a lot of it was just trial and error, and then you work out that a watermelon and a kamokamo and anything related to the kamokamo, so a pumpkin, etc., all of that family, they like to grow similar to a kumara and not in the ground but in a mound. And then we get this kanga or corn and we work out, okay, well, no, that's different again. And we do this in 5s in the taurima. We use the taurima model or the Quincux model to plant that. And so you plant your So I'll do my corn, my tomatoes, my brassicas, my not really my brassicas actually, my peas, and because I haven't got a big acre to plant my peas like I would have in Waiakone, because we plant an acre of peas easily, our family. But brassicas, you can just plant them anywhere because they're just going to grow. And, it's just things that are passed on to you, but like the different things when you're cooking that your mother or your father or your grandparents taught you. And when you go back to it, there was actually a practical reason for it, rather than it's just Nan's special way.
Yeah. Yeah, that we've forgotten.
I've only just returned back to gardening in the last 3 years, and I'd had a 20-year break, and I was shocked at how quickly everything came back. As soon as I put the intention out, I was going to start planting again, and I put some kale in, put some potatoes in, and well, I'm always growing rhubarb, so I don't really count that as gardening because rhubarb just grows. As soon as I did that, it all came back immediately, like riding a bike. Far out. So it's at us, and some people do have better hands. And my interpretation of green hands is actually probably people just being more observant than others.
Right. And growing a garden in a forest, because, Māori did clear spaces for their, for the maraes and so forth, right? That interplay between the forest and the settlement of where Māori would be as a whānau and a hapu. What were the things that the whānau would look for when they said, this is where we want to base this is where we want to live?
So water, defence, and wind. So if you look on the Whanganui River, most kāinga, most settlements were on the other side of the river to the road. Why? Less wind. So they're on the true right or the western side of the river most times. And just otherwise you get the westerly and the prevailing winds and it just hits you. And the other thing is that we would garden on hills. And the garden would usually be on the east facing or northeast facing side of the hill, because a hill warms up quicker than a flat spot. And so we would do terracing, and we would do only what's required rather than getting too crazy, knowing that we would then also have sections of forest that we worked with or manipulated, especially on cliffs, where there was kieke. Kieke is like a flax, but it has a fruit. And so we'd just go in and tie it all up to help create a microclimate. You'd abseil down. And this is typical on the Whanganui River. And you just tie the kieke up so that it would help grow a good lush fruit. And it has a very similar taste to a mix between a banana and a pineapple. But they're only little. But you've got to work with them rather than just leave them to grow native, wild. So you've got to provide that extra climate for them to become sweet, otherwise they're bitter.
Right.
So, all of these different things, we would work with the forest, and we would only clear what's required. And then once something is finished, you're allowed to return back to nature, which is why you may have seen in the 80s a heap of old meeting houses and paddocks, 70s and 80s, all of these different meeting houses just fallen down in a paddock. And that wasn't about us not caring. That was, it's finished its job. It's now time to let it return back to the mother. And, but it was always very, what a waste, blah, 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 heritage. Whereas heritage is kept in the spoken word. Very rarely would we use objects to maintain heritage. And what we would do is every generation, prior to about 50 years before Cook arrived on the scene, every generation we would sail back to Hawaii to recalibrate. And so Hawaii in this context that I'm talking, because Hawaii is a continuous idea that evolves as we move. We would go back to Rangiatea or Raiatea in the Society Islands near Tahiti, and we would go back and recalibrate with other people from other islands, recalibrate the knowledge so that if there were any gaps, we would correct each other so that we'd then take consolidated knowledge back to keep teaching. And that was our version of publishing Encyclopedia Britannica.
Right.
Because every generation would go back, recalibrate the knowledge. So our cousins from Samoa, Tonga, Rarotonga, Hawaii, etc., would all come together, share our knowledge, and it was a bit of a competition. And then critique the delivery. You missed this. No, I didn't. Well, this is what we know. Oh, actually, thank you. And so they would do that and then go back. Sadly, about 50 years before Cook arrived, the Māoris and the Samoans had a fight and breached each other's tapu, and so didn't go back. But when Cook arrived, Tupaia wasn't just any person that got sent with Cook. Tupaia was of that class of people. And so he was the best person to send on a navigational trip. And that's why he could easily communicate with Māori, because you look at the records, there's nothing which says, they can understand some things, but not everything that they're both saying. Whereas today, I can follow some things in Samoan more in Tongan. I can understand Tongan more. And Hawaiian's way easier. Some parts of the Cook Islands are easy. Some parts aren't. And Rapa Nui is easy. So I can go to Rapa Nui and I can stumble along all right. I can go to Hawaii and stumble along all right. Tahiti, I haven't really had much to connect with there. And in the Cooks, only some language groups I can communicate all right with. And it was amazing because I thought I was going to Rapa Nui to help me with my Spanish before I got to South America. All I did was speak Māori the whole time. Oh, sweet as.
Che, the saw a wonderful documentary recently. It was around the tribes of the Amazon, And, listening to you talking with the interaction with the tree, I could have been listening to that documentary about the tribes there. Almost exactly
Universal,
the same. Almost. And then I was thinking back to my heritage of paganism, right, and going back before Christianity, is that, you're almost talking about pagan type relationship with the people and the trees and so forth back in Europe.
Yeah, well, when I went to live in London, young and dumb, having fun, my uncle, who was one of my principal teachers, he said to me before I left, he says, now when you get there, go and introduce yourself to the tangata whenua. What? The English? I said, the tangata whenua. And I thought to myself, he's losing it. I got there, went to Ngāti Rānana, the London Māori club, and Ngāti Rānana have a relationship with the Druids group. And this Druids group wasn't until a year into me being there that I got to go to a ceremony with them in some woods close to Bath. And got there that night. Everything was starting the next morning. And, some of them were having some fun and into different things, and others were just drinking and chilling out, drinking mead. And I'd never tasted mead or anything beforehand. And then I learnt, it's the traditional drink. Way before beer. And the next morning, we did a welcoming ceremony, and I would have sworn I was in a ancient Māori ceremony where you had a warlock of the north, a witch of the west, a wizard of the east, and a such and such of the south, men and women who were keepers of those doors, and the rest of us in the circle. And even though they were saying different things, the concepts were exactly the same. And which is why I said you do have a memory at the beginning. Not sure if we discussed that at the beginning of this or prior when we were offline. Because we all have it. And the first time I went to Scotland, I had some very interesting experiences with my tupuna giving me a good growling. Saying, bloody took you long enough to get here.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I was just reflecting on that pagan thing because, the thing is, Che, I've always enjoyed working with trees. I've always, it's something that I spend a lot of time planting trees and pruning trees, and I had not forgotten, but I'd overlooked the fact that I saved a piece of forest when I was 26, and back in Mangatanoka, and I go back there. My sister's ashes are scattered there, and I have a deep affection for that piece of bush, and it was through the QE2 covenant that I was able to protect it.
Yeah.
And it's lovely to know that's it. It's and it was a piece of bush that had been severely damaged through pollution and had a creek running through it, and there was whey from the local dairy factory that used to flow through there and killed a lot of cows and so forth, and that's all been, the pollution is gone and it's being regenerated. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Nice.
And so it's there in me, Che. It's just I don't think I'm just as connected to it as I'd like to be.
Well, as the song goes, you got a knock on the door.
Yeah. Is there anything else we want to round off with?
I think the key thing is to remember that nature isn't separate from us. We are nature. And I know from a Māori point of view, the water that flows through us is tangaroa. Tangaroa is the ocean. And the water that flows through us is salty, which is why we have saline put into us when we're at hospital. The air that flows through us is tawhiri mātea. And so that's the wind. And sometimes it's a strong wind. And sometimes the wind can make a few noises. But, all of those different components are a reflection of what's in nature. The fact that 70-odd% of Mother Earth is water, and we are a reflection of that.
Yeah.
And our tupuna understood that, and I think actually most tupuna around the world understood that. It's just that we have fallen for this idea of science being the only way, when actually the root of science was engineered by the church, and the church was engineering us to go to a certain place, and we've just got to reconnect. And I like the thing in the Avatar movie, where they get their ponytails and they plug into that tree. And as I know it in my culture, the name of that tree is Te Ngahere, the tree of life. And Te Ngahere sits at a place called Te Awanga, and that's where you plug in. And that's all we need to do, is give ourselves time to plug in. And when we do that, we'll start to observe. And when we observe, nature will start to talk to us.
Yeah.
There's a big smile.
It's just really, that really resonates with me. Yeah, and it's something that, is very dear to me. The function of decay and replenishing, the function of the birds, or what did Māori know about the interconnectedness of the trees and the mycelium and the fungi and all of that under the ground?
So I suppose I can start with the subterranean waterways and the interplay between Ru and Pūmanawarua. Ru is the god of earth movement, generally referred to as, volcanology and tectonic movement. I'm just going to call it earth movement for now. And there are different names associated with each atua, with each god. And in the case of Ru, there are different names that explain both what happens under the ground and then above the ground. And so all of the magma, the ha-ha that comes out, there's terminology for that. There's terminology for when the different continental plates hit each other, which is pretty amazing stuff. And then the stuff that we see with the naked eye, whether that's blowing up, like rangi toto, because rangi toto is, most people use that as the term for lava. My people use that for lava that's spitting out into the sky. But lava that flows is ha-ha. So two different terms to describe different types of lava. Different to the bombs and all of that and the ash that come out. And And so Rui talks about what happens under the ground, what happens above the ground. Pū Manawaroa, she is the atua associated with subterranean waterways, aquifers, etc., awa atua. And those awa atua all have names and on the Whanganui River, you'll ask any of the old people, where does their water come from? And they'll point up, and they're pointing up towards the mountain, even if the spring is that way. They go, oh, from up the maunga. Which maunga? Isn't it there? Yeah, that's our local maunga, but the water there actually comes from up on the maunga. And they're talking about a massive aquifer, which we call Te Waihohonu. When it comes to the forest specifically, I share that because you can't just talk about the forest. And if you look at swamps, swamps are the connector between waterways, subterranean waterways, and then as swamps then join to forest. And there'll be places that are dry where you can easily dig a hole and throw a line in. You dig a hole, then you see the water flowing, you throw a line in. My kuia used to talk to me about that all of the time. She showed me a few places, only when we were driving, so I know where at the swamps, which ones to go to, but to start digging holes, I'd probably have to dig 50 holes before I find the right place. So that's all knowledge that was passed on, not just by story, but also by sharing different songs, genealogy, and sayings that are codes for you to remember. When it comes to the forest, there's a really popular song, E tu kahikatea. E tu kahikatea, hei whakapai roa, awhi mai awhi atu, tātou tātou e. And what that talks about is the kahikatea stands and how the roots of the kahikatea are interlocked, interconnected. And if you want to reflect unity as humanity and connect that to a metaphor associated with a forest, you always talk about the kahikatea. Even though they like their fet wheat. But that's why. Because when you're in the bog, you can't move. But more so because of their root system. And when their root system is interconnected, it's a sign that you can't move them, or it's very difficult to move them. And if you cut too many of the stand, you can kill the whole stand. So you have that. And then there's another point which happens in current environmental practices. And I heard a well-known astronomer, Māori astronomer, Rereata Mākiha. I heard him talking about a week or so ago. And he's spot on. He says, the regional councils don't know what they're doing. They support farmers and give them, access to funds to plant waterways and that. But they're fucking it up. Because, here's some flax. Or here's 3 species. And none of those species are probably going to give you a canopy, which will then ensure that other things can grow underneath. And so all of that is a typical connect between what happens at the canopy, what happens at the midsection, and then the ferns, the moss, and everything else underneath. Because it's not just dirt, but the role of worms, the role of insects, and their importance in helping all of the foliage that falls from those different trees to decompose and to give nutrients to the system. And one thing Māori often do is we will take bark of trees for dyeing. We'll take the bark of tōtara for roofing traditionally, and for the walls. And we don't necessarily cut those trees down. But what we then do is get all of the decomposed matter in the vicinity of that tree, all of the dirt and the leaves and all of that below, gather that all up, and you either spit or mimi, pee on the part where you've taken the bark off, and then you put that dirt on so that it's a band-aid. Why? You put the nutrients from itself back into itself, and that will help heal, and the bark comes back quicker.
Right.
And so that whole relationship between what's decomposing or rotten then helps the system fix itself again. So that's a little bit, at least anyway, about that role. And I think the key thing to note is Papa Tuanuku. That's not the grass that I can see. She's underneath. Papa Whāroa, that's the crust. Probably not even the crust. It's the topsoil. But below the topsoil, then you're getting into Papa Tuanuku.
Mm. And that's the fascinating thing, Che, from Western science has started to learn in the last few years that plants talk to each other
absolutely.
Under the ground, right? You guys knew that a long time ago.
Yeah, and not only do they talk to each other under the ground, their talking is done in a rhythm, with vibration, which is why we talk to plants. We not only have names for the kōwhai or the harakeke, we then also have the personification name, which isn't always the same.
What does that mean?
So their atua name, their God name. And so everything in Te Ao Māori, in the Māori world, has a personification. And so us as humans, our personification is Tu. And we incorrectly translate Tu as the god of war. I like the Hawaiian translation, where they refer to Tu Mātauenga, which is the war component. They refer to him as the god of politic.
Right.
And because politic doesn't necessarily end up in fighting, but there's tension. And so that's us as humanity. But you look at the different trees, and they will each have a personification. And so when you are going to take from a tree, like you're going to take the bark of the raureko, I don't know the Latin name for the raureko, but if you take the bark from the raureko or the tānekaha, you talk to it. If you don't know its personification, you just call it tānekaha or raureko. But the reason why you go back to the personification is because that provides the whakapapa of that tree. And when you can connect to the whakapapa of that tree, you can then connect yourself to that tree as a relation. Hey, cuz, how are you? And by doing that, it's not just about plants talking to each other. It's about all of us talking to each other, which is why, even though it's an introduced animal, when we go hunting, cut the heart out of the deer and you give it back. You give it back to nature so that it's a formal, it's teaching the act of appreciation, gratitude. And so as they talk, you must also link into and talk to them, which is why before you go into the bush, you should always hokarite, you should always invoke natural order, do a prayer, do a karakia. You should always hokarite, you should always invoke, because what happens, I was always taught you do a karakia because you're asking the God of the forest to look after you. The way I explain it today is you do a karakia to switch modes. To switch modes from one modality to another. Because from walking on the path, you're now entering in the bush where there might not be a path. And so if you're not careful, you're going to trip over every fifth root. But you've got to change modes so that you change consciousness and awareness and are able to enter in so that the person in front of you, when they go past a branch, it doesn't flick in your face because you've changed modes and you are aware. So that's what invoking the atua of the forest, tāne, so that you are then becoming part of him, one with him, one with all of them that are there. You know, a classic example is, because I practice this all the time, I took my green waste bin out this morning and I was noticing my neighbour's olives and I could see the different stages that the different trees in the row are at. Simply because I've trained myself to look and to see everything that might just look like olive bush, row of olives, because he's making a bush out of it.
Okay, the sorry to cut you off. I just want to go back because I mean this all ties up because what you're talking about is consciousness. Because you know it's intriguing that Māori understood this interplay, this communication between trees and grasses, and right. And it's just fascinating to me that, but I suppose it happened over hundreds of years.
Yeah. And the other thing is when they came here, one, it wasn't a mistake because they already had instructions. They already had a map. But two, when the last big migration came, because everybody calls it the Great Migration, but it was the last of the series of migrations. When that last migration came, what happened is they already had those practices and they just had to adapt them from putting most of their focus on the ocean to now putting their focus primarily on the forest. Just a bigger landmass, eh? And then they added a few more into the generic Pacific pantheon of atua. Because there are different things here. And the classic one which you'd think they would have had in the islands, and they do, but it's a different form. But the most famous atua they created when they got here is Tāwhiri Mātia. And Tāwhiri Mātia is the god of elements, generally referred to as the god of wind. And even though there's wind in the islands, but the predominant westerly that hits here is a different type of wind, which then affects the 100+ names that we also have for wind. It's about 150+ names for wind.
Che, the last conversation we had, you talked about going up to Europe and engaging with some of the Druids and so forth. And I had a conversation this week with a young man from Ireland. And he talked about they had, for the name rock, they've got 39 different names for rock.
Yeah.
And it just reminded me back of that story that, he said, 39 names for rock.
Well,
so
all cultures do. And I think the difference is that the Industrial Revolution took too much of the knowledge away and left it with science. Whereas before that, it was with the community, because they were the scientists. You talk to Joe Blogg's farmer down the road from you who might be 70, they understand science. They understand the science which help them farm. They know that when the kōwhai on the Mangawhero down the Parapara Road, when that blooms, the next thing is going to happen. Or when the whatever blooms, or when down south and you get a hoarfrost, this is what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
That's all science, because at its basic level, science is the study of observation. But the Industrial Revolution took science away from community and created an elite system which hasn't been helpful for us. Don't get me wrong, I'm pro science. But
Jay, going back to the communication between the plants, what I find fascinating is that the science, which I need to validate my thinking, right? It's interesting. I don't know why. I haven't,
I know why.
Tell me.
So the Industrial Revolution pushed forward the idea of the logical brain, the logic brain. And you'll find many Māori often fight with that idea of a logic brain. It's not that we don't have it, but one part of the brain should never control the other part.
Yeah.
It should always be working in unison with each other. And so the wairua part of us, in Te Ao Māori, there's generally three parts or three beings. There's wairua, hinengaro, tinana. Wairua, for want of a better word, is spirit. Hinengaro, for want of a better word, is mind or intellect. And then tinana is body, physical. So there are three components at a really basic level, because there's then divisions within those. And they should always be working with each other. The moment that one of them is on holiday, you're in danger. And the moment that, and I said that there are different components to each of those three. And if you look at the brain, if you let one component of your brain operate too much, you'll start to limp because you're using one side more than the other. And science has encouraged us to, because it was a fight, because science originates in Christianity, and it was a fight between who got power. And they wanted to demystify the mystic. And there are some things that science still can't explain, and there are many things that science can explain. But, it's... And one of the things that we need to be assessing as Te Ao Māori is the place of tapu and noa. It's binary. So noa is the opposite of tapu. Because as a result of a collision of cultures between Christianity and science versus Māori, went like that. And so Māori started to just say, oh, that's tapu. Don't touch that anymore. When actually there's legitimate reasons when you can, and there are legitimate reasons when you can't. And it's no different to the forest. There are times when you can take, and there are times where it's dumb to take. Simply because there are other things happening. And so, like, our maramataka, the calendar system, the lunar calendar system of Te Ao Māori, isn't just about the moon. It's about the energy that's happening in the environment and how it then impacts on us as humanity, the animals, and the plants and the trees. And there are better times to go into the forest than other times. There are better times to go to the sea than other times, even if it looks calm. But there'll be heaps of undertow, whatever, at certain times of the month than others. There'll be certain times where there are more cobwebs than others. And those repeat each time with the lunar calendar. And so when we're thinking of the forest, we shouldn't just think of the forest, but we should be thinking of the swamps, the grasslands, the moon, the sun. Sun marks season. Moon marks day or night. And so we should be thinking about those different things. And stars mark month. So all of those different things also connect to what's happening in the forest, because it's an ecosystem. So it's more than the forest. Because a tribe that had swamps was a rich tribe. They were very wealthy, because there's a system in a swamp that can sustain you. Fish, fowl, waterfowl, and then all of the resources, including one of the most important resources, rope, flax. If you've got swamps, you were rich. Plus, swamps have insulation for your house, the reeds. So, yeah, tribes that had massive swamps were very wealthy. And so back home in Ohakune, in the Waimarino area, you had two massive areas, one called Waimarino and one called Murimotu. And so Murimotu is between Waiouru and Ohakune, and Waimarino is between Ohakune and up to National Park towards Taumarunui. And so those two are big swamped areas. And all our relations down on the Whanganui River every summer would come up to the mountain to go to New World or Pick and Save. And they'd come and hunt, and then they'd go back down to their homes. And so Yeah.
And Che, it's interesting because from a Western point of view, swamps were there to be drained and turned into monocultures.
You use hills facing east to plant your vegetables because they're the warmest soil.
Mm.
Leave the flatlands for it to be grass or forest, or to build a hunting camp. But that was based on the food that we had available to us.
Yep.
If we had brassicas and all of that, we might have done some things a bit differently as well. Who knows?
Che, look, thank you for this session. It's been interesting to reflect on the science and where it's come from, and that power of observation and how important it is. And I'm fascinated that with this journey, because, as I said, my need for science, because to trust. And I was reflecting that if this was a Pākehā conversation, I would structure it so differently. And so I'm really enjoying being involved in a conversation which is far broader and wide-ranging, because it is an ecosystem. Because I've been taught to like things compartmentalized and crisp and clean and this and this and this and this, and forget about all this interconnectedness. I wasn't trained in that.
Well, and the other thing too is that observation is a gift, because you don't observe just with your eyes. You observe with all your senses, and when you treat it as a gift, you're grateful every time you spot something. And I think the more we treat observation as a gift, every day will be a beautiful day.
What a great day. What great way to round this off, Che. Observation is a gift. Every day is a great day. Yeah. That is absolutely true.
Yeah. That's a Willie Wilson. It's a Willie Wilson teaching. My dad.
Classic.
Mind over matter, or it doesn't matter. That's Dad.
My father used to wake up in the morning, Che, and he would literally go out every day and go, "What a great day," because his health had been so bad all his life.
Yeah.
That when he woke up in the morning, it was a bonus.
Yeah, I'm here.
And it was just a wonderful thing. It didn't matter what was going on. He absolutely meant it. Get up in the morning and go, "What a great day."
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to appreciate that. That was quite a unique view of the world to a lot of other people. And it came about because, his health had been so bad. And it was just like, still here. It's a great day.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And so that wraps up this series, talking to Che, helping to teach me and listeners around the biomimicry that we are drawn to use to help us, guide us in our journey with collective intelligence. Che, thank you so much for your time. You've been a huge influence on myself, this community, and so many other people, and just deeply appreciate and have so much gratitude for your time and sharing all this knowledge. So, Che, thank you, and go well. Thanks for listening in. We're Collective Intelligence, a one-of-a-kind people ecosystem that takes inspiration from Mother Nature. To find out how we reimagine leadership development, visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz.